The Vindicator, a Terran war story. The Vindicator was unlike any warship the galaxy had ever seen. Long, jagged, and black as night, its hull bore scars from battles it had never lost. No empire had ever captured it, no admiral dared approach without praying first. When it appeared at the edge of the Zelari Dominion's home system, they laughed. Then it started killing, and the laughter stopped. Captain Rin, supreme warlord of the Zelari Dominion, watched from his command center as fleet after fleet disappeared from his screens. His advisors whispered desperate explanations about glitches, malfunctions, and secret tactics, but Rin knew better. He had heard the stories whispered in dark corners across the galaxy about humanity. They talked about a species that didn't just evolve, they adapted. About soldiers who didn't retreat, they came back from the dead. And about black Terran warships that fought like wounded gods and never left survivors. The Dominion had laughed at those stories. They saw humans as primitive creatures with short lifespans who were obsessed with war. They thought Earth was just a minor world, an ant nest that would be easy to crush. They made one terrible mistake. They gave Earth a reason to fight. It started with what seemed like a small border dispute. A Zelari patrol ship destroyed a Terran mining colony, killing 5,000 people. These weren't soldiers, just workers, families, and children. The Dominion claimed it was an accident, a navigation error. Earth didn't file complaints or send diplomats. Instead, they sent the Vindicator. Now the warship hung in orbit above Zelari Prime, facing an entire armada alone. Its hull glowed faint, red from thousands of atmospheric burns and plasma hits. Its weapons were silent for now, but everyone knew what was coming next. Inside the Vindicator, Commander Marcus Rin stood at the helm with his jaw clenched, scanning the destruction they had already caused. He wasn't young anymore. Gray hair showed at his temples, scars lined his neck, and his knuckles were cracked and calloused from too many fights. That never made it into official reports. He wasn't here for glory or even revenge. He was here to finish the job. Status. He barked at his second-in-command, Lieutenant Miles, a hardened man with a voice like sandpaper. Dominion lost 312 ships. No survivors, Miles reported. They're still sending more. We're reading 7 carrier-class vessels, 25 destroyers, and 2 world breakers. Marcus didn't flinch. Bring us closer. Miles turned slowly, raising one eyebrow. Sir, we're already in range. I said closer. The bridge fell into tense silence. Everyone on board had accepted the truth weeks ago. This was a suicide mission. Earth hadn't asked for survivors. It had asked for a message. Marcus was that message. He leaned forward to the communication panel and switched to an open channel. This is Commander Marcus Rin of the Terran vessel Vindicator to the Zelari Dominion. You bombed a civilian colony. You murdered families. You thought you were making a point. Now it's my turn. He cut the line and gave the order. All guns. Fire. The ship roared to life. It didn't just fire missiles, it spoke in hellfire. Lances of red fury carved through the Dominion ships like a scalpel through flesh. The shields barely held for a second. The first world breaker cracked apart before it could even charge its core. The second tried to flee but was too late. Planet killer warheads slammed into its side, splitting it open like rotten fruit. Zelari Prime skies turned red, not from fire, but from the reflection of every burning ship above. Inside the Dominion Palace, Rin fell to his knees as the screams of his empire echoed from 1,000 communication channels. He finally understood. They had awakened something old, something human, and it didn't forgive. The wreckage floated, like grave markers around what used to be the crown jewel of the Zelari Dominion. Zelari Prime, once the capital of 1,000 conquered worlds, now lay beneath the sky painted in red and ash. Its orbital fleet was reduced to nothing more than molten debris. Inside the Vindicator, the crew stood in silence, not from pride or shock. They were soldiers of Earth. Pride was for the living, and shock was for those who didn't know what they were capable of. Commander Marcus Rin didn't speak for a long time. He just watched the destruction unfold on the main screen, his reflection staring back at him from the shattered hull of a Zelari carrier, still spinning with dying plasma engines. A few escape pods floated away from the wreckage. He let them go, not out of mercy. He wanted survivors, witnesses, someone to carry the story back to the rest of the galaxy. Status, he finally said to Miles, who was wiping blood from his brow. It wasn't his own blood, just shrapnel from a system explosion to decks down. Miles's voice was low and controlled, like a man trying not to feel the weight of all the bodies he just helped kill. We're reading a system-wide retreat. Dominion forces are pulling back to Sector 6. Local defenses on Zelari Prime are scrambling, but their planetary cannons are offline. Looks like we hit their communication tower during the last attack. They're blind. Marcus nodded. And our casualties? Miles looked at the floor for a moment. 17 dead, mostly on the lower decks. Hull breach near Reactor 2. We sealed it. But the medical bay is full. Marcus clenched his jaw. Get those families flagged for notification. Next of kin. All of them. Don't let Earth's bureaucrats bury their names in some file. Marcus walked to the observation window. Even though the view screens gave him better tactical information, something about looking at destruction with your own eyes made it feel earned. You think they're done? Miles asked from behind him. No, Marcus said. They're just scared. That's different. Miles smirked. Could have fooled me. We just took out an entire defensive grid. I haven't seen a kill count like that since Mars. Marcus didn't smile. His eyes were hard and distant. And look what it cost us. Half the Terran fleet. 6 colonies abandoned. A war that should have ended 3 years ago. He turned to face Miles. This isn't victory. This is the bill we have to pay. Down on Zelari Prime, chaos ruled the streets. The Imperial Palace, built into the mountain face of the capital's highest peak, groaned under the weight of its own failure. Elite guards who had been bred to crush rebellions and public uprisings now stood huddled in hallways, gripping their rifles like toys. The smell of burnt plastic and electrical fire hung in the air. Supreme Warlord Rin wasn't wearing his ceremonial armor anymore. He sat in a command chair that no longer commanded anything, staring at a flickering holographic map filled with red X marks, ships, outposts, defense stations, all gone. His advisors had stopped talking hours ago. The ministers had all fled, whether as cowards, traitors, or corpses. He hadn't eaten or slept. Yet something deep inside him still clung to the idea that this couldn't be happening, not to him, not to the Dominion. They had ruled this part of the galaxy for over 400 cycles. They had enslaved entire species, harvested planets, and turned suns into energy farms. They had everything except a warship like that. What are they? He muttered to no one. The only answer came from his military strategist, General Father, one of the few who hadn't fled. They're Terran, Father said barely above a whisper. But not like the others we fought. This one's different. Older, smarter. It knows what we fear. Dren's voice trembled for the first time. They were nothing, just another animal species with guns. No, Father said, staring at the wreckage outside the shattered dome. They're not animals. They're ghosts of vengeance. They don't fight to win. They fight because you gave them a reason to never stop. Back on the Vindicator, Marcus stared at the mission clock. They had 28 hours left in orbit. That's all Earth Command had authorized. A display of force. They'd said, break the back of the Dominion. Show the galaxy that humans bite when provoked. But Marcus knew better. 28 hours wasn't a warning. It was a leash. He turned to his ship's artificial intelligence. An old unit named Grim that was known for having fewer safety protocols and more aggressive tendencies than any civilian model. Grim, Marcus said, I want a scan of every city on this hemisphere. Focus on military installations, secret prisons, and known execution camps. Grim responded with its usual gravelly hum. Scanning. 5 seconds. There was a pause. You're going to want to see this, Commander. The screen lit up with points of interest. There were over 50 camps, detention centers, forced labor compounds, experimentation labs, all operational, all hidden beneath civilian infrastructure. Miles frowned at the display. They're hiding. There were crimes behind hospitals and schools. Marcus didn't even blink. Of course they are. He tapped the screen. Start targeting communication links and command structures. We'll feed coordinates to resistance cells. Miles raised an eyebrow. Resistance? Marcus nodded. They're still down there. The Dominion crushed rebellions, but not completely. There's always someone left. Someone angry. Someone scared. They just needed proof that the Empire could bleed. You're giving them a match to light the fire, Miles observed. I'm giving them justice. Later that evening, Marcus found himself alone in the quarters once used by the ship's original admiral, long dead now. He didn't bother turning on the lights. The stars outside gave enough illumination, painting the room in silver and blue. He sat with a small black box in his hands. He hadn't opened it in months. Inside were photographs, a woman and a boy, his wife and son, both killed in the colony bombing. He wasn't supposed to be here. Earth Command had grounded him, called him unstable, too angry, too personally involved. But then the Vindicator needed a new commander, and the kind of person it needed was someone who didn't care about orders anymore. He touched the corner of the photo, his jaw clenched. I told them, he whispered, his voice shaking for the first time. You don't touch my family. His communication device pinged. Commander, came Miles's voice, quieter than usual. The Dominion just sent a long-range broadcast. They're calling for a ceasefire. They're offering surrender. Marcus looked at the photo once more, then closed the box. He stood up. Surrender's not accepted. The next morning, the galaxy watched as a Terran warship launched encrypted data packets across every known communication network. Videos, images, files from the Dominion's darkest programs, human colonies destroyed, prisoners tortured, children experimented on, proof that the galaxy couldn't ignore. Empires that had once stood beside the Dominion now pulled away in disgust. Trade partners cut their ties. Neutral factions issued condemnations. Protesters took to the streets across multiple star systems. But none of it mattered to Marcus. He wasn't here to win a public relations war. He was here to make sure no empire ever tried this again. On the second night, the Vindicator dropped its defensive shields. Not out of confidence, but out of defiance. The Dominion, watching from their broken throne, saw it as arrogance, a trap, or a message they couldn't resist. Answering, a final attack fleet launched from deep orbit, coordinated under their last loyal general. They had 80 ships, everything they had left. Miles reported it as soon as the sensors detected them. They're coming, he said. Everything they've got left. Marcus nodded. Good. Miles narrowed his eyes. We're not going to raise the shields? Marcus stepped onto the bridge and stared straight ahead at the incoming fleet. No. He tapped the communication system. All hands, battle stations. Fire when ready. The final battle didn't last an hour. The Vindicator didn't move from its position. It simply opened its internal weapon vaults and deployed experimental technology that Earth Command had never approved for field use. Weapons with names like sun piercers, quantum hooks, and singularity blades. The galaxy didn't even know these words yet. Ship after ship screamed into the void, split apart by weapons they couldn't understand, let alone defend against. It was more than slaughter. It was a revelation of what human technology could really do. When it ended, the Zelari Dominion didn't just surrender. They collapsed entirely. Within days, resistance cells rose on every planet they had controlled. Governors were dragged from their palaces. Statues were torn down. Families of Terran colonists who had been exiled and hunted were given their homes back, if they were still alive to claim them. And the Vindicator left without a word. It didn't wait for praise or parades. It didn't return to Earth for a hero's welcome. It didn't even acknowledge the collapse it had caused. It simply disappeared into deep space, leaving behind only stories. Stories of a ship that bled black fire, of a commander with nothing to lose, and a warning carved into the memory of every star system. No empire survives a Terran warship. The galaxy was quieter now. Not peaceful, just quiet. The kind of silence that comes after a monster dies, but before the scavengers arrive. Star systems once owned by the Zelari Dominion floated in a power vacuum. Their leaders were gone, their armies crushed, their flags burned or buried beneath rubble. But nobody stepped in to claim what remained. Not yet. Everyone had seen what the Vindicator could do, and no one wanted to be next for 7 days. The warship was a ghost. No signals, no transmissions. It went dark after the last Dominion ship fell. Some thought it had self-destructed, its mission complete. Others believed it had returned to Earth to be decommissioned or buried under bureaucracy. They were wrong. The Vindicator was still alive. It was hunting. In a nameless sector on the edge of the former Dominion borders, Commander Marcus Rin sat in the observation deck of his ship, staring out into the abyss. Not the pretty kind of space that people dreamed about. This was the edge, cold, black, dead. Just like him. He hadn't spoken to Earth Command in weeks. They had stopped sending messages after their 4th request was met with silence. He knew. They were angry. He had defied orders, gone too far. Crossed lines that even Earth didn't want crossed. But they weren't going to court-martial him. Not because they respected him, but because they feared what he might do next. He still had the ship, he still had the crew. And worst of all, he still had a reason to fight. Miles walked into the observation chamber, dropping a data tablet on the table. We found him. Marcus didn't look up from his stars. How sure are we? 99%. Facial recognition confirmed by Grim. Cross-checked with 2 intelligence leaks from former Dominion systems. He's hiding on. Vorsk. Marcus finally moved, just a twitch in his jaw, a flicker of something behind his eyes. Dr. Hex. The man who had designed the biological weapon that killed Marcus's wife and son. Yeah, Miles said. That bastard. Vorsk wasn't officially a Dominion planet. It had never been one on any official records. It was just a research world, off the books. Used for experiments they couldn't admit to, weapons they couldn't acknowledge, and hiding monsters like Hex. It had no central government, no defenses, just silence. Exactly the kind of place monsters ran to when their empire burned. The Vindicator dropped into orbit unannounced. There were no defense grids to alert them, no fleets to challenge them. The only thing waiting below was snow, mountains, and a compound hidden in the rocks. Marcus didn't issue warnings or send scouts ahead. He suited up for a personal visit. The landing was brutal. Wind howled across the cliffside like the screams of the dead. Snow battered their small landing craft as it pierced the atmosphere, engines shrieking in protest. Miles sat across from Marcus, rifle in hand, checking his gear with the calm of a man who had done this too many times. "You sure you don't want backup?" he asked. Marcus shook his head. "To slow. He'll run." They weren't there for a siege. This wasn't a battlefield. This was a hunt. The landing ramp hissed open, and the cold hit them like a punch to the face. They moved fast and silent, weapons ready. The compound was almost invisible, carved into the stone and hidden behind an avalanche trigger system. But Grim had already hacked through it. As they approached, the doors groaned open on rusted tracks. Inside was a graveyard of abandoned laboratories, broken equipment, and dried blood. It had been evacuated in a hurry, but not everyone had escaped. They found Hex on the lower levels, sealed behind an emergency vault with no oxygen flow. He had locked himself in when the sensors detected the Vindicator's arrival. Marcus stepped through the final door alone, leaving Miles in the corridor. Hex sat in a chair, gaunt, pale, and old, a shadow of the proud Dominion scientist he used to be. His voice cracked when he spoke. "I knew you'd come." Marcus didn't answer immediately. Hex gave a wheezing laugh. "You killed everything, burned it all down. And for what? Revenge. You think that brings them back?" Marcus stepped forward and slowly drew a small object from his jacket, a photograph of his wife and son, the last thing they had ever given him. "That mattered. I want you to see what you destroyed before you die." Hex stared at the photo. Then Marcus pulled the trigger. One shot, clean and quick. No glory, no final words. Just the end of a man who had made genocide look like science. They didn't stay long on Vorsk. There was nothing left to take, nothing worth remembering. As they flew back up to orbit, Miles glanced at Marcus. "You think this changes anything?" Marcus didn't answer right away. He looked out the window, watching the white planet fade behind them. "No," he said finally. "But I slept better last night knowing I'd kill him." The weeks that followed blurred into something strange. Marcus stopped checking official logs. The crew stopped asking for formal orders. They drifted through space, but not aimlessly. There was still purpose, still fire burning inside them, but they weren't soldiers anymore. They weren't even official Terran representatives. They were something else entirely. Every star system they entered, they left different. Pirate kings vanished without explanation. Slave traders disappeared in the night. Collaborators turned up dead with holes in their heads and Dominion tattoos burned off their bodies. Whispers followed the Vindicator like smoke. They weren't just a ship anymore. They were a force of reckoning, a promise that justice would find you no matter where you hid. Earth Command finally broke down and sent a message, though it wasn't the kind Marcus expected. Instead of praise or medals, it was formal and cold. "Commander Marcus Rin, you are hereby recalled to Earth for debriefing. Your current operations exceed mission parameters. Stand down or be marked as rogue." Marcus didn't answer the message. Instead, he handed it to Grim. "Broadcast that to every former Dominion world." Grim paused for a moment. Unedited. Let them see Earth blink first." The response from the star systems was immediate. Protest erupted in Earth's capital. Support for the Vindicator poured in from rebel worlds, former prisoners, even human colonies that Earth had long abandoned. They didn't want Marcus to stop. They wanted him to finish what he'd started. But Marcus knew this couldn't last forever. Even legends have limits. One night, standing alone on the forward observation deck with his hands behind his back and his eyes distant, Miles joined him quietly. "They'll come for us," Miles said. Marcus nodded. "I know. What are we going to do?" Marcus's eyes narrowed as he stared into the starfield. "Make them understand why we never should have been needed in the first place. Because this was never about revenge anymore. It was about truth. About the lie the galaxy told itself that humans were weak, that they were young, that they were just another species to be conquered and ruled. Marcus had buried that lie under starships and blood. And if the galaxy wanted to forget again, then he would remind them why they shouldn't. There were two kinds of betrayal that could destroy a man. The first came with knives and blood and screaming. The second came quietly with official orders, with signatures on documents, with people you once fought beside calling you a problem that needed to be handled. Marcus Rin was about to face both kinds at once. The message came through at 0600 ship time, a high-priority encrypted directive from Earth Command routed through every surviving Terran communication station. still loyal to the central government. It wasn't a warning. It was a death sentence. To Vindicator AI Corps, Marcus Rin commanding. From Terran High Command. Subject, cease operations. Authority revoked. You are hereby designated as a rogue commander. Your actions, while effective, are no longer aligned with Terran diplomatic objectives. You are ordered to power down the Vindicator, await retrieval by Fleet Marshal Davern, and submit to full psychological evaluation and debriefing. Failure to comply will result in the Vindicator being classified as a hostile vessel and engaged accordingly. This is your final notice. Miles was the first to read it on the bridge. He didn't speak because he didn't need to. Everyone knew what Earth had just said. They weren't thanking Marcus for breaking the back of the Dominion. They weren't honoring his sacrifice. They were silencing him because he had become inconvenient to their plans. Marcus entered a few minutes later, dressed in his standard black tactical armor, his jaw set like stone. He read the message once, just once, then handed the tablet back to Miles. They're sending Davern, he said simply. Miles nodded grimly. Him and the Ninth Fleet. Marcus gave a humorless smile. Fleet Marshal Davern's an arrogant fool. He'll come in loud and make a show of it. We're talking about 30 warships, sir, Miles said carefully. The flagship's probably the Tyrant's Grace. Same class as us. They won't be bluffing. Let them come, Marcus said coldly. In Earth's high orbit, the Ninth Fleet assembled like a gathering storm. 30 Terran warships, all freshly refitted and armed. Some still had ceremony paint on their hulls from their recent launch celebrations. The media followed their deployment with excited speculation, but they didn't call it a hunt. They called it a disciplinary retrieval operation. But every soldier in the Ninth Fleet knew the truth. They were going to war against one of their own. Fleet Marshal Davern stood aboard the Tyrant's Grace with his chin held high, and his medals polished to the point of absurdity. He had never liked Rin, seeing him as unstable, dangerous, a leftover from the brutal old Terran wars that Earth now pretended to regret. Davern believed in order and following the chain of command. Rin believed in justice, and that made him a liability that needed to be eliminated. Meanwhile, out in a dead star system, on the edge of former Dominion space, the Vindicator waited in the darkness. It didn't run because Marcus Rin didn't believe in running, not from Earth, not from anyone. But he wasn't stupid either. His ship was being stripped of diplomatic protection. Earth Command was preparing to label him a terrorist. If the Ninth Fleet caught him in open space, they would swarm him with overwhelming numbers. He needed leverage, and he needed it fast. He found it in a place no one expected, Sithos, an old prison world that the Dominion had used to hold Terran war criminals. That designation didn't mean anything real. To the Dominion, war criminals were just humans who had fought back against their occupation. Sithos was where they had dumped soldiers who refused to surrender, and some of them were still alive. Marcus knew a name he hadn't said aloud in years. Corbin Nax. Once the most feared ground commander in the Terran Reclamation Corps, Nax had raised to Dominion cities to prevent a massacre of civilians. He had been court-martialed, disavowed by Earth, and buried on Sithos because he had saved civilian lives when Earth Command said to stand down and let them die. If Corbin was still alive, he wasn't just a symbol of resistance. He was a spark that could light a fire across the galaxy. Landing on Sithos wasn't difficult. The Dominion was dead. Its guards were gone, and its surveillance network was offline. But the prisons were still locked, still operational, still buried under miles of reinforced stone and metal. Marcus took a ground team, Miles, to engineers, and a combat artificial intelligence in a walking mechanical frame. They moved through the ash fields like ghosts, scanning for the right identification codes buried in broken computer terminals. They found Corbin in cell block 9. He hadn't aged well during his imprisonment. His hair was long and unkempt. Deep scars covered his face and arms, and his voice sounded like gravel that had been broken in half. But the fire in Corbin Nax's eyes hadn't dimmed at all. He looked up when Marcus opened his cell door, and he said without question, just recognition. Took you long enough. Marcus handed him a rifle. I need you. Corbin grinned, showing teeth like old knives. About damn time. Back aboard the Vindicator, Corbin cleaned himself up, put on tactical gear, and started making battle plans before Marcus even asked him to. He was a natural-born strategist who understood both human nature and military tactics better than almost anyone alive. We have a narrow window of opportunity, Corbin said, studying fleet movement maps on the ship's main display. Davern's coming from the Sol 12 system. He'll try to intercept us in neutral space, away from any public attention. Standard Earth protocol, no witnesses to what they're planning to do. Marcus folded his arms across his chest And how? Do we beat him? We don't, Corbin replied without hesitation. Not in a direct confrontation. Instead, we remind the galaxy what Terran blood really cost when it spilled. We hit Earth where they're most vulnerable. Miles raised an eyebrow. You're talking about attacking Earth itself? No, Corbin said, pointing to a blinking dot on the navigation map. We hit Idolon. Marcus tensed up at the mention of that name. Idolon was Earth's most secret shipyard, a classified facility hidden deep inside a nebula cloud where sensors couldn't track it. It was where they built the weapons that Earth didn't want anyone to know about. Superpowered plasma cannons, stealth cruisers, orbital deterrent systems that were illegal under every interstellar treaty Earth had ever signed. And it was completely unprotected precisely because no one even admitted it existed. You hit Idolon, Corbin explained. And suddenly Earth Command has much bigger problems than one rogue ship. They have a security leak. They have public exposure of their illegal weapons programs. We don't need to win a direct military victory. We just need to make them bleed politically and diplomatically. Marcus didn't like the plan, not because it was risky, but because it was morally right. It would force Earth to feel the same kind of pain and humiliation they had inflicted on him. Not just physical damage, but the deeper wound of betrayal and public shame. The jump to Idolon was rough and dangerous. The nebula's electromagnetic interference destroyed every communication channel they had. Their defensive shields glitched and failed repeatedly. Sensors malfunctioned completely. It was like flying blind through a hurricane made of static electricity and cosmic radiation. But Grim guided them through with its superior artificial intelligence and navigation systems. The artificial intelligence didn't speak much anymore. It had bonded too closely with the ship's systems and absorbed too much of the death and vengeance that flowed through every circuit and wire. But when Idolon appeared on their screens, massive, hidden, and monstrous in its implications, Grim whispered one word that said everything: target. The first missile barrage wasn't a warning shot. It was a statement of intent. 12 high-explosive warheads, with 2 direct hits on the facility's main reactor systems. The shock wave shattered half of Idolon's cloaking systems, exposing the rest of the secret facility to deep space surveillance networks that would record everything. Then the plasma weapon attacks followed. They carved through the station's hull like a hot knife through paper, detonating internal fuel storage bays that Earth's engineers thought were protected behind multiple fail-safe systems. Within minutes, Idolon was transformed into a storm of fire and collapsing metal structures. But Earth wasn't going to let this attack go unanswered. To defense cruisers that had been docked for routine maintenance launched under emergency power, the Hammerlight and Justice reclaimed. They were older ships, but they were still strong and well-armed. Corbin took control of the helm for the first exchange of fire. He hit Justice reclaimed with the double plasma arc that blew the main engine clean off the ship's hull. The Hammerlight returned fire immediately, raking the Vindicator's starboard side with rail gun bursts that penetrated their armor. Alarm sirens screamed throughout the ship as damage reports flooded. And Marcus held his position firmly. Bring us around a broadside position. Load all missile tubes. Grim's voice whispered through the intercom system with mechanical precision. Authorization required for maximum firepower release. Marcus didn't blink or hesitate. Override code Exodus. Authorization Rin Alpha 1. Confirmed, Grim said with something that almost sounded like satisfaction. Unleashing maximum destructive capability. They fired everything they had in one devastating barrage. The blast tore the Hammerlight in half like it was made of paper, the wreckage spinning through the nebula while trailing streams of fire and atmosphere. By the time Earth Command could organize any kind of response, Idolon was a smoking ruin floating in space. But most importantly, the galaxy saw everything. Every hidden weapon system, every treaty violation, every lie that Earth had told about. Their secret military programs was now exposed for everyone to see. And the Vindicator's electronic signature was on every piece of evidence, making it clear who was responsible for this revelation. That was the moment when Earth's government finally snapped and showed their true colors. A system-wide warrant was issued, not just for Marcus, but for every crew member aboard his ship. The charges included treason, terrorism, and war crimes. They offered full pardons and substantial financial rewards for anyone who would turn him in. They put a massive bounty on his head and declared him an enemy of humanity itself. Miles read the official notice on the bridge and spat on the floor in disgust. They want us to run like scared animals. Marcus didn't speak immediately. He was staring at the image of Idolon still burning in the distance, watching Earth's lies turn to ash and metal debris. Corbin stepped up beside him with grim satisfaction. We're not soldiers anymore, Marcus. Marcus nodded slowly. No. He turned to address his crew. We're something else now. And every man and woman on that ship, every engineer, every gunner, every medic and veteran, stood behind him without question. Not a single person left. Not one soul abandoned him when things got dangerous. The Vindicator vanished from sensors again, but its message didn't disappear. Data broadcast flooded every communication network in known space, unedited. Footage of Eidolon's destruction. The names of every Dominion were criminal that Earth had secretly protected. The truth about Earth Command's illegal weapons programs. The truth about Marcus Rin and why he had been forced to take such extreme action. In one sentence. Was repeated in every language known to the stars. No empire survives a Terran warship, not even its own. The first Terran cities to erupt in riots weren't the wealthy ones where politicians lived. They were the forgotten places that Earth Command had abandoned. Border colonies, burned out mining towns. Industrial districts buried in the pollution of failed expansion projects. Places where the names of fallen soldiers were carved into bar walls. Because no one bothered to build proper monuments anymore. When the Vindicator's broadcast reached these communities, when every working man, every former soldier, every civilian, widows saw the secret shipyard burning and learned the truth about their government's lies, they didn't ask questions or demand explanations. They simply remembered everything they had been forced to forget. They remembered their sons and daughters who had died on missions that were never officially acknowledged. They remembered the relief supplies that never came when colonies were attacked. They remembered Earth's cold silence when they begged for help. And now they had a name for the one man who had spoken louder than their government ever had. Marcus Rin. Earth Command responded the way frightened tyrants always respond. To challenges to their authority. They doubled down on their previous policies. They passed new security laws that restricted civil liberties. They launched new propaganda campaigns painting Rin as a madman drunk on power. They issued a galaxy-wide declaration that he had gone insane and become a threat to galactic stability. But even as their official message echoed across every communication tower and satellite relay, something else spread much faster through unofficial channels. The raw footage of Eidolon's destruction. The recorded screams of Earth officers abandoning their post when the attack began. The image of the Terran flag burning in a classified military facility. While a black warship vanished into the shadows like an avenging angel. No editing, no filters. No official denials could change what people had seen with their own eyes. The Vindicator had become more than just a myth or a legend. It had become a symbol of resistance against corruption and lies. And symbols, as any government knows, are much harder to kill than individual people. For 3 weeks, Earth's military forces hunted Marcus across multiple star systems. Fleet Marshal Davrin sent ships into every sector that Marcus had ever visited or operated in. The Ninth Fleet was expanded from 30 to 50 warships. Bounties were increased to astronomical amounts. Civilian communications were monitored constantly. Even private jump gates between star systems were sealed off by military order. Earth was tightening the noose around Marcus's neck, but they made one critical mistake. They assumed he was trying to escape. Marcus wasn't running from anything. He was preparing to strike at the heart of the problem itself. The Vindicator had vanished for exactly 21 days, and then, just before the end of the 4th Terran administrative cycle, it reappeared in the most audacious location possible. It materialized in high orbit around Earth itself, cloaked and silent like death waiting to strike. Earth's defense networks hadn't seen it coming. They hadn't imagined that Marcus would dare to bring his ship to their homeworld. But Marcus wasn't hiding anymore. He was done sending messages and making examples of smaller targets. He was here to end this conflict once and for all, no matter what the cost. Inside the warship, the atmosphere had completely changed from the tense anxiety of previous battles. The bridge wasn't filled with nervous energy anymore. Instead, there was a calm, focused determination. It was the kind of deadly calm that only comes when there's no room left for fear, when everyone on board has already accepted that they're either going to win this fight, or they're going to die loudly enough that the galaxy never forgets their sacrifice. Marcus Rin stood at the front of the command deck with his arms behind his back, staring at the blue and white sphere of Earth as it slowly rotated below him. It was his planet, his home, his betrayer, and now his target. Status report, he asked without looking away from the planet. Grimm's artificial intelligence answered first, its voice having grown noticeably colder and more mechanical over the months of constant warfare. Orbital defense systems are at 70% operational capacity. Primary Terran shield grid is active and functioning. Fleet Marshal Davrin's command ship is in geostationary orbit over New Avalon. Miles stepped up beside Marcus, keeping his voice low. You really going to attack Earth itself? Marcus nodded without hesitation. Yes. Miles watched his commander's face carefully. even if it makes you the villain in history forever? Marcus turned toward him with eyes that had seen too much death. They already decided I was the villain. I'm just giving them a reason they can never forget or forgive. The battle plan was terrifyingly simple in its directness. Some might even call it stupid. They were going to punch straight through Earth's defenses with no stealth tactics. No trick shots, no false surrenders. Just the Vindicator dropping out of its cloaking field and lighting up the sky like an angry god. Delivering judgment, Corbin Nax took charge of the weapons systems, loading every warhead they had in their arsenal, including the ones that Earth had sworn in public didn't exist. Planet-cracking explosives, electromagnetic pulse weapons, fusion payloads designed for decapitation strikes against government targets. This isn't a siege, he explained to the crew over the ship's communication system. This is precision surgery. We cut out the head of the beast. Then we broadcast the infection to every communication channel in the star system. Marcus stood on the command deck, listening to his people prepare for what might be their final battle. He looked at each face, studied each expression. They weren't afraid of what was coming. They were ready to meet their fate with weapons in their hands. The attack began at exactly 0400 Terran Standard Time. The Vindicator decloaked in low orbit, positioning itself directly beneath the main satellite defense network, and opened fire with everything it had. Within seconds, orbital missile silos exploded like fireworks across the night sky. 3 of Earth's most expensive defensive systems, trillion-credit Skylance installations, shattered under targeted electromagnetic pulse attacks that overloaded their circuits. The sky over the Atlantic Ocean turned orange with reflected explosions. The 9th Fleet scrambled to respond, but they had been caught completely off guard. Davern's command ship, the Tyrant's Grace, rotated into firing position while launching fighter craft and defensive interceptors. But it was already too late for a coordinated response. The Vindicator wasn't aiming at military ships anymore. It was aiming at something much more important, the Truth Engine. Officially, the Truth Engine didn't exist in any government records. Unofficially, it was the largest communication filtering system Earth had ever created. It was capable of rewriting entire data transmissions in real time, automatically censoring whistleblowers before their messages could reach the public, and generating approved narrative versions of events that made the government look good. The Truth Engine sat deep inside the Terran government complex, buried under layers of fake civilian infrastructure, and hidden behind a dozen corporate front organizations. Marcus knew exactly where it was because he had stolen the location codes during his raid on the Ilon facility. As the Vindicator drifted over the city of New Avalon, its weapons bay doors opened like the mouth of a predator. One missile launched silently into the night, black, unmarked, and carrying a payload specifically designed to destroy information systems. The Truth Engine never had a chance to defend itself. The explosion didn't just destroy the building where it was housed, it completely freed Earth's communication networks from government control for the first time in over a century. Suddenly, Earth citizens could hear the truth about their government's actions, unedited, raw, and blindingly clear. Every file that Marcus had collected during his campaign against the Dominion started broadcasting. Simultaneously, every atrocity that Earth had ignored, every death that Earth Command had funded, every time the government had betrayed the colonies, all of it was dumped across every screen on the planet without filters or censorship. People froze in their homes as they watched footage they had never been allowed to see. Entire cities paused their daily activities. Soldiers put down their weapons and stared at screens in disbelief. There were no more official lies to hide behind. Not anymore. Fleet Marshal Davern panicked when he realized what was happening. He broke every military protocol in the book and ordered his ships to fire on the Vindicator, even though it meant that orbital debris and weapons fire would rain down on the cities below. Millions of innocent civilians could be killed by his desperation, but he didn't care. He just wanted Marcus Rin dead, no matter the cost. Desperation makes people make terrible mistakes. Davern's flagship charged its main orbital bombardment cannon, preparing to fire at the Vindicator with enough force to crack a moon. Marcus didn't wait to see what would happen. He locked his weapons onto the Tyrant's Grace and fired a Singularity warhead, one of the most devastating weapons in human space. The Tyrant's Grace didn't explode in the traditional sense. Instead, it folded inward on itself, dragged into its own artificially generated gravity field, and vanished in a silent implosion that left nothing behind but empty space. No explosion, no debris, just the complete absence of what had once been a mighty warship. Davern was gone, and with him died Earth's chain of military command. Back on the planet's surface, chaos erupted in every major city. The riots that had been simmering for weeks turned into a full-scale revolution. Protesters stormed the ruins of the government complex, Civilians surrounded Terran military bases, demanding answers from officers who had no idea what to tell them. Some generals tried to surrender to avoid being torn apart by angry crowds. Others attempted to flee the planet entirely. But nowhere was safe now that the truth had been revealed. The carefully constructed lie that had held Earth's government together had finally collapsed completely, and above them in orbit, the Vindicator hung in the sky like the sword of justice itself. Marcus stood in the observation deck, watching his home world burn, not in literal fire, but in the flames of truth that consumed lies and corruption. He didn't smile or show any satisfaction. He didn't speak to celebrate his victory. He just watched Earth tear itself apart as people learned what their government had really been doing in their name. Miles approached him quietly from behind. "You think this fixes anything that was broken?" he asked. Marcus shook his head slowly. "No, nothing can fix what they did." "Then why did we do all this?" Marcus turned around, and for the first time in months, his eyes showed not anger but a deep, bone-weary sadness. "Because now they'll remember what happens when you try to silence men like me. They'll remember the price of betraying the people who fight and die for you." He gave the order not to land on Earth, not to negotiate with whatever government might emerge from the chaos, not to demand anything from anyone. They had already won the only victory that mattered, not because Earth had fallen to their weapons, but because Earth could never again pretend that its hands were clean. As the Vindicator pulled away from Earth's orbit and prepared to jump back into deep space, civilians across the planet looked up at the night sky. Some watched with rage, some with awe, and some in complete silence as they tried to process what they had witnessed. For the first time in human history, people didn't see a flag or a military uniform or a political leader as the symbol of their species' strength. They saw a man in a black warship who had refused to bend, refused to break, and refused to shut up when the powerful told him to be quiet. In the weeks that followed Marcus's attack on Earth, the planet's government fractured completely and collapsed. New political systems rose from the ashes, decentralized, brutal in their honesty, and impossible to control from a single location. The colony worlds took control of their own destinies. For the first time, supply lines that had been cut off were reopened. Veterans who had been abandoned or imprisoned were released and often put in positions of authority. Some people wanted Marcus to return from wherever he had gone. They wanted him to lead the new systems, to rule over the political reconstruction, to become the emperor of a new human empire built on justice instead of lies. But he never came back to accept their offers. He disappeared just as suddenly as he had appeared, without any final speech or grand declaration. One night, the Vindicator jumped into deep space and simply didn't come back, but the legend remained, and grew stronger with each passing month. Every planet told the story a little differently as it spread across the galaxy. Some said that Marcus Rin was still out there somewhere, waiting in the darkness for the next empire to forget the lessons of history. Others claimed that he was dead, buried somewhere among the stars with his mission finally complete. But everyone agreed on one fundamental truth that had been burned into the collective memory of every intelligent species. That warship, that man, that warning was now carved permanently into the bones of galactic history. No empire survives a Terran warship. And now the entire galaxy understood exactly why that was true. 6 months after Earth fell silent and began rebuilding itself, the galaxy was louder and more chaotic than it had ever been before. The old empires had collapsed or crumbled into smaller, weaker fragments. Earth's iron grip on human space had been severed like a cut tendon, messily, bloodily, and painfully. The colony worlds were free to govern themselves. The surviving Dominion territories were being carved up by warlords, rebel coalitions, and species that had been enslaved for generations. Dozens of new governments rose from the ashes of the old order, each one promising that they would be different from their predecessors, that they had learned from the mistakes of the past. But most of them weren't different at all. Some were actually worse than what had come before. With Earth distracted by internal reconstruction and the Dominion completely dead, new predators came crawling out of the shadows. Mercenary syndicates expanded their operations. Slave trading guilds operated more openly. Technology cartels sold Dominion weapons to whoever could pay the highest price. And worst of all, some rogue Terran admirals saw an opportunity to build their own personal empires using whatever ships and loyal personnel they could steal from the corpse of the shattered Ninth Fleet. The war that Marcus had thought he was ending had simply evolved into a different form. And in all that chaos, rumors started circulating again about the warship, about the man who had killed an empire, about Marcus Rin himself. Most people thought he was dead, finally claimed by the violence he had lived with for so long. Others said he was hiding somewhere in the Outer Rim territories, burned out and broken, just waiting for death to catch up with him. But they were all wrong about what had happened to him. Marcus wasn't dead. He was watching and waiting. The Vindicator hadn't disappeared from existence. It had simply gone dark, cutting off all communication signals, all jump signatures, all military engagements. It drifted silently through unclaimed space on the edge of the abandoned Icaron asteroid belt. A graveyard of shattered moons, collapsed, mining outposts, and ships that had never made it home from their final voyages. Inside the legendary warship, the lights were dimmer than they used to be. The crew was much smaller now. Many of his people had chosen to go their own way after Earth's government fell. Some had returned to homes they hadn't seen in years. Others had found new wars to fight in the chaos that followed. Marcus had let them all go without saying a word, understanding that they had given him everything they could and deserved to choose their own paths. Only a handful of people remained with him now. Miles was still there, as loyal as ever. Corbin had stayed, unable to imagine any other kind of life. Grim, the ship's artificial intelligence, continued to function, though it seemed to have become even more withdrawn and mechanical. And Marcus, himself, spending most of his time alone in the lower decks. He had converted the old war room into something that looked more like a tomb or a memorial. He stared at old files and old mission logs. He listened to communication transmissions from across the fractured galaxy. He heard the voices of new monsters, rising to power in the vacuum left by the old ones. But he didn't take any action. Not yet. Because even Marcus Rin didn't know who he was supposed to be anymore. One night, as he sat surrounded by holographic displays, showing the political chaos spreading across known space, Grim's voice crackled through the speakers. The artificial intelligence hadn't spoken directly to him in days. "Commander," Grim said, its voice low and mechanical. Marcus didn't look up from the star charts he was studying. He hadn't slept properly in days. "What is it?" "We've intercepted distress signals from the former alien zone, Colony Arc 7 is under siege." "By who?" Marcus asked tiredly. Grim's voice paused for a moment, as if the AI regretted having to deliver this news. "By us, sir." That got Marcus to look up from his displays. "Explain what you mean." Grim's tone shifted slightly, like a machine trying to process something it found disturbing. "To Terran warships bearing Earth military design specifications, but not registered in any official database, have initiated orbital bombardment operations. They're using old Dominion tactical protocols, total elimination tactics. Civilian casualties are considered acceptable losses." Miles entered the room a few seconds later, his face pale with anger and disgust. "It's Admiral Vosk." Marcus stood up slowly, feeling a familiar cold rage beginning to build in his chest. He remembered Vosk well, a career Terran officer who was cold, efficient, and completely arrogant. Vosk believed that diplomacy was weakness, that mercy was treason, and that power was the only truth that mattered in the universe. Earth Command had quietly relieved Vosk of official duty after Marcus's strike on the Eidolon facility, but they hadn't put him in prison. They hadn't stripped him of his ships or his loyal followers. They had simply looked the other way and pretended he didn't exist anymore. Now Vosk had two warships for battalions of ground troops and a god complex, and he was using the Terran name and reputation to build something that was potentially worse than the old empire had ever been. Marcus stared at the blinking red dot on the tactical display that represented the colony under attack. He didn't blink or look away. "Prepare the engines for immediate departure," he said quietly. Miles stepped forward. "You sure about this? We could just let someone else handle it." Marcus's voice was as cold as space itself. "I didn't tear down the old world just to let some bastard build a new tyranny on its bones." The Vindicator launched from its hiding place without any ceremony or grand speeches. No declarations of intent, no broadcast messages, just a single jump straight into hyperspace toward the Aurelian zone. They were heading directly into another war. The warship arrived in the middle of a massacre that was already well underway. The colony's sky was painted red with reflected fire from burning buildings. Admiral Vasta's ships, the Crucible and the Torchbearer, hovered in low orbit like mechanical executioners over the cities below. Every 3 minutes, one of them would fire a precisely targeted plasma weapon. The shots were accurate enough to collapse specific buildings without damaging the surrounding infrastructure. They were targeting civilian locations, hospitals, schools, residential areas. It was terror-made efficient and systematic, designed to break the will of anyone who might resist. The rebel coalition on the ground had already been shattered by the psychological warfare. People were hiding in basements and underground shelters, too terrified to fight back. And then the Vindicator appeared on their sensors like salvation arriving from the depths of space. Just like that, Without any warning or announcement, Marcus Rin had returned to the Galaxy stage. The ship materialized out of hyperspace like a black angel of vengeance. The Crucible was the first ship to detect the new arrival. It rotated toward the Vindicator, activated its forward weapon systems, and transmitted a demand for identification. Marcus didn't bother to answer with words. He answered with weapons fire instead. One shot from the Vindicator's main gun, equipped with hull-piercing technology and a singularity-laced warhead. It hit the Crucible's command bridge like a meteor. Strike. The enemy ship didn't explode in the conventional sense. It simply vanished, folded in on itself by artificial gravity, then dispersed as burning fragments scattered across the battlefield like metallic rain. The torchbearer panicked when it saw its sister's ship destroyed so easily. The remaining vessel tried to escape, tried to jump back into hyperspace before it could be targeted. It didn't make it to safety. Grimm's targeting systems tracked the ship's trajectory and deployed an AI-guided kill shot with mathematical precision. 5 seconds later, the torchbearer was just debris falling toward the planet's surface. The people in the colony didn't cheer or celebrate when the attack ended. They simply stared up at the black warship hanging in their sky. They had heard the stories and legends about the ship and the man who commanded it. And now Marcus Rin was here, real and alive, hanging over their world like the sword of justice itself. Marcus opened a communication channel that broadcast to every planet in the star system. No encryption, no security protocols, no delays. "This is Marcus Rin," he said, his voice low and rough with exhaustion. "If you fight for power over others, if you plant flags on the graves of innocents, if you rule through fear and violence, then know this, I'm coming for you next." He cut the transmission without waiting for any response. That single act of defiance became the spark that lit a fire across the galaxy. Within days, 3 other rogue admirals who had been building their own little empires simply vanished without a trace. Within weeks, entire slave trading caravans began destroying their own navigation equipment rather than risk encountering the Vindicator. Within months, the broken star systems were whispering a name they hadn't dared to say in a long time: justice. But Marcus wasn't fighting to fix the galaxy or to build a better future. He was fighting because the galaxy had promised to become something better after the old empires fell. And then it had betrayed that promise by allowing the same old patterns of corruption and abuse to emerge again. Back aboard the ship, the situation wasn't simple or easy for anyone involved. Miles watched Marcus from a distance, observing how the old fire was returning to his commander's eyes. But he could also see what that fire was burning down inside the man to sustain itself. "You're not going to stop doing this, are you?" Miles asked one night as they cruised through the wreckage of another would-be warlord's base that they had destroyed. Marcus didn't answer immediately, staring out at the stars through the observation window. Finally, he spoke. "No. Even if this crusade ends up killing you?" Marcus looked directly at his old friend. "I'm already dead to them, Miles. I died the day Earth betrayed everything I fought for." Corbin was sitting nearby, methodically cleaning his weapons as he always did after a battle. He made a grunting sound that might have been disagreement. "No, you're not dead," Corbin said bluntly. "That's the real problem here. You're still alive. You're still fighting, and you scare the absolute hell out of everyone who has power. Every time you show up somewhere, the cowards run away, the tyrants shake with fear, and even the so-called heroes get nervous. You know why?" Marcus turned to look at him. "Why?" Corbin continued working on his rifle as he spoke. "Because you remind all of them that this peace they're enjoying was bought with blood. Your family's blood, the blood of everyone who died fighting the Dominion. And none of them ever wanted to pay you back for that sacrifice." Marcus stared at his old comrade, and for once there was no anger burning in his eyes, just pure exhaustion that went deeper than physical tiredness. Grimm's artificial voice suddenly cut through the silence in the room, interrupting their conversation. "New priority target detected," the AI announced. Marcus turned toward the nearest communication panel, where there was a pause, as if Grimm was reluctant to deliver this particular piece of information. "Earth," the AI finally said. Marcus blinked in surprise. "What did you say?" Grimm's tone became even more mechanical and flat. "Earth's new provisional government is preparing to announce the reintegration of surviving rogue admirals into the official military structure. Full pardons will be issued, complete reinstatement of rank and privileges, including amnesty for the successors to Admiral Vast's operations. The only requirement is a pledge of loyalty to the new government." Marcus didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even blink for several long seconds. Then he whispered, barely audible, "So that's their plan. They're going to rebuild exactly the same machine that caused all this." Corbin stood up slowly, Setting his clean weapon aside, "You want to stop them." Marcus turned to face his crew. And when he spoke, his voice carried a finality that everyone recognized. "No," he said clearly. "I want to burn it all down again."